All right, we're live. Welcome to another edition of The Lab Report, brought to you by Mr. Cannabis Law. I am Todd Rosales, and with me, as always, Mr. Cannabis Law himself, Dustin Robinson.
Hey guys, great to be here, and a very happy birthday to our man Todd Rosales. It was his birthday yesterday, so we wish him the best.
Thank you very much, man. Another day, another trip around the globe, and another episode of The Lab Report. Time to get into it. So, Dustin, we've talked about these guys on previous episodes. Ianthus Capital, they're in the news again. They've recently just restructured their debt. What does this mean for them, and is it enough to actually turn things around for Ianthus?
Yeah, so this debt restructuring article is probably pretty confusing for the layman. Essentially, what's happening is they're not able to pay their debts, and we've seen this story before with Acreage, Green Growth Brands, a lot of these bigger MSOs, they're not able to pay their debts. And what's happening is the creditors are taking control. So they're bringing the creditors to the table. They're trying to negotiate a workout. And ultimately what happens here is that the creditors have all the bargaining leverage, right? They hold the debt that is owed that can't be paid. So essentially what happened here is that the debtors are going to be taking over almost 97 to 98% of the company. So, we've seen this with Green Growth Brands. They had to actually hand over some of their assets to some of their creditors. So kind of a backdoor entry to potentially getting into this industry is to kind of become a creditor of one of these companies. And then when they default, you could foreclose on their assets or negotiate something where you take over equity. And that's what's happening here. And, this is just, Ianthus does have a Florida license through Grow Healthy. So this is another Florida MSO where the creditors are taking over a substantial amount of control. And this is challenging when they take over control like this. Now creditors need to approve and be a part of any other transactions that Ianthus is trying to do. So it could potentially make the operations of the business relatively complex.
All right. Well, I know we have a lot of friends that Grow Healthy, so we wish them the best and nothing but good things there. Staying in Florida, and this is something that everybody in our state has their eyes on, or at least everybody in Cannabis Lab has their eyes on, and I'm sure plenty of people around the country because it's an interesting market down here. When the pandemic started, you, me, all of us, we tuned into a very live Zoom hearing for the Flora Grown case. And if you're anything like me, after you were done with that, watching that case, you were probably thinking, I don't know what to think because I didn't see anything going on there. What's going on with the Flora Grown case? Where are we, and how much longer do we have to wait to see what the future of Florida's cannabis market is going to look like?
Yeah, so the Flora Grown case is mainly about three things. It's about vertical integration, the cap, and the registration process. The part that most people are interested in is the vertical integration part. So the lower courts have basically deemed the vertical integration structure to be against our Florida Constitution. And right now that's what's before the Supreme Court, is whether it is indeed unconstitutional. If they affirm it, that means that it is unconstitutional. And really the Department of Health would need to come up with a horizontal structure. So, everyone, I get tons of calls of people that are interested in getting involved in the industry. And until this court decision is decided, there's no application process. So I've been really hoping that the Supreme Court would come to some sort of decision, whether it's an affirm or a denial or whatever, or an overturn, whatever they decide. I was hoping for it to be announced in August, but the Supreme Court just announced and ordered for both parties to come back for an October 7th hearing, another oral argument, not a hearing, an oral argument. This is the second one, and it is related to the special law aspect of the case, which has really been overlooked in the news to a large extent. And basically it's saying that they created in the statute a special class, and really legislators can't make laws that are to a closed group of people. So what that special law is all about is whether or not it's a general law, or if it's a unconstitutional special law. And they're going to come back and argue that on October 7th. Hopefully we'll get a decision by November or December, depending on which way that decision goes. Some people think the legislator is going to have to go back and make revisions to the statute. There's actually a group that actually thinks that there's a way that they don't need the legislator, and in fact the Department of Health will be able to just go right into it and create that horizontal structure if the case is affirmed. And if it's not affirmed, then they'll be able to start that licensing process all over again. So we have the possibility, and I always say the possibility because you really don't know what's going to happen here in Florida, but I'm hoping for licenses to be available in Q1 of 2021. So a lot of people are asking me, what could you be doing right now? There's a lot of things you could be doing right now, but we really don't know the way the Supreme Court is going to rule. So it's kind of, if you want to take steps right now, you're doing so at your own risk of maybe going in a direction that the Florida Supreme Court's not going.
Well, I appreciate the explanation, Dustin, and I'm sure after the next hearing, I'm going to have to reach back out to you and get another one. In the meantime, Florida Supreme Court, if you want some help with those god-awful Zoom backgrounds, give me a call. We'll make it look a whole lot better than you did last time. In quarantine news, human beings are not the only people being quarantined right now. And folks, that's a joke. I'm sorry if that offended anybody. But during the vape crisis, Massachusetts required quarantine of a ton of their vape products, which have still not been released. What's going on in Massachusetts? Why is this happening? And you know, why aren't they releasing these products yet?
Yeah, and most people are familiar with the vape issue that happened where a lot of people were getting sick. There was a lot of research being done to figure out what was causing it. While the research was being done, the Massachusetts Cannabis Commission basically said, hey, you need to quarantine any inventory of these vape products. Since then, they've done research. Most research is showing that it is the vitamin E acetate that's causing the issue, and it's really from the illicit market. But what the Massachusetts department also found is that there's some very high lead levels. So they weren't even looking for lead, and they happened to find something totally unrelated to what they were looking for. And so they're basically asking for input from the public on what they should do next. And as a result, they've allowed now, vape products to be sold that are purchased now, but the previous vape products are still sitting in quarantine. So you have these cannabis companies that some of them are saying they have $1 million to $2 million worth of inventory sitting on their shelves that may expire soon. So they're just asking Massachusetts to allow them to either sell the product or rework the product so that it could then be tested and resold. But yeah, it's very unfortunate with the pandemic and all the other things going on financially that now these companies are also having to sit on inventory that could be valued, in the millions.
Yeah, it's definitely not good for business at all. Getting the product back out would be good financially, but let's make sure that we have safe products on the shelves. This one was really interesting to me, and I know that you have a little bit of background on this, but the U.S. government recently put out some guidelines, and it specifically had to do with Bermuda, the ones that I found. I don't know how wide-reaching this is, but essentially, if you are a cannabis user in another country in which it's legal, or another, we'll call it territory in which it's legal, or you're in that country's legal cannabis industry, it could prevent you from getting a visa to visit the United States legally. I can see this being an issue long term, especially given the relationship between the US and Canada, with so many Canadian companies trying to access US capital and US capitals accessing the Canadian markets. Is this an issue that you think we're going to have to deal with for a while now?
Yeah, I think this is really just a reminder that here in the US, marijuana is a Schedule I federally illegal substance. And so when you're dealing with federal laws such as visas, and other immigration laws, you're going to run into some issues if you may be involved in the cannabis industry, or if you happen to be a patient in the cannabis industry. I saw this I had a client that wanted to, they were actually a doctor, they were seeking their green card, they wanted to start practicing cannabis medicine. And one of the things they look at when you're trying to get your green card is moral turpitude. And so, I was concerned that potentially the federal agency would look at her as a cannabis doctor and potentially weigh that on her moral turpitude, which could potentially happen. And at the end, we all kind of decided for her not to take that risk. There was just too much to risk, and for her to get her green card and then maybe after that practice cannabis medicine. Similarly with, I get the gun question all the time, whether you could have your marijuana card with your gun card. Yes, you can have both, and Nikki Fried's been very vocal about that. But when you fill out that federal form, when you go to purchase a new firearm, question 11E, this is the form that needs to be filed with the ATF. Question 11E asks you if you take any illicit substances, and it has a little asterisk that says even if you are a patient that's approved through a state program, marijuana is still federally illegal. So you have to answer this question yes, and when you answer that question yes, you will be denied a new gun. So there's a lot more behind that. So you know, if you have that question, reach out to an attorney and talk to an attorney about that. But the point is that with all these federal laws and all these federal agents, it's important that even if you are an approved, you know, a qualified patient, or even if you are a licensed business through the state, it's still very possible that that federal agency in charge is going to look at you as a criminal. And that's kind of what Bermuda, in a sense, through these guidelines is kind of saying, is that your marijuana use could potentially weigh on their decision.
Yeah, I think a lot of folks see, you know, shows like this and the other shows and all the conferences and everything, and they tend to forget because it's been so normalized that it is still a Schedule I substance from the federal government. But it's real and it causes issues, and hopefully it doesn't keep us from being able to join the global cannabis market as a whole. Moving on, MedMen, the people solely responsible for everyone hating the term the new normal, which is completely overused these days, they're in the news again. MedMen is now responsible for paying the legal fees of their ex-CFO in his lawsuit against them. This is much more like a divorce than anything else I've ever seen. How much longer does MedMen have to turn things around? And is this setting a bad precedent or a good precedent for the industry?
Yeah, I mean, MedMen has been a part of a lot of different lawsuits. And I mentioned earlier, we talked about Ianthus, Green Growth Brands, Acreage. MedMed is but another company that has a Florida license that's going through their own financial issues. And essentially what this article is saying is that they had an employment contract. The employment contract allowed, it basically required MedMen to pay the attorney fees for any dispute related to that employment contract. And that's a pretty common provision you put in contracts where, you know, sometimes you have prevailing party provisions. Sometimes you say the other side will cover the fees. And basically the court ruled that, yeah, MedMen needs to cover the fees. Now, if they ultimately are able to say that this contract is invalid, then that money may be owed back from the CFO at the end of the case. But the reality is the way these cases work is you try to shift that cost as early as possible, because ultimately these generally end up getting settled. And right now, $500,000 a year to be paid out in attorney fees is money that, quite honestly, MedMen just doesn't have. And so this just puts them in a bigger situation to negotiate some sort of settlement with their CFO. But it's also potentially another financial burden that they'll need to take on. So it's just MedMen is just getting punched in the face in all directions, and they are holding on by a thread right now with respect to their cash flow.
Yeah, another one of the early emergers that unfortunately, you know, we don't know what's going to happen to them. And the last topic we're going to go over today, folks, get out your bongs, bowls, and papers because cannabis cures COVID. At least that's what a group in Israel is saying. So researchers in Israel are saying that the anti-inflammatory properties of cannabis could be used to treat COVID patients. Folks, I thought this was BS when I first read about it. There was a group out of Canada that was studying it, and now it's a group out of Israel. We know that cannabis, at least CBD, has great anti-inflammatory properties. What do you think the results of this is going to be? And if it does come out as true, do you think this can contribute to federal legalization in the US? And will the US embrace this treatment?
Yeah, so before I say anything, I'll just say that the FDA doesn't allow any health claims to be made with respect to any CBD products. So with respect to what I say, I'm not saying this on behalf of any of my clients or anything like that. I'm speaking from my own personal experience, but you know, a lot of the benefits that they talk about with cannabis is the potential anti-inflammation effects of it. And you know, me, I work out a lot. I'm constantly beating up my muscles. And I'll tell you, as a patient, I use it for its anti-inflammatory effects. And I will tell you that I actually tested positive for COVID a few weeks ago, and I felt the amount of inflammation. What happens is your muscles ache tremendously. That's one of the symptoms, beyond just a fever, potential headache, stuff like that. Your muscles ache. I would say that was probably the worst symptom. I felt like a 98-year-old man when I had it, and my muscles were just aching. What did I do? I don't take Tylenol. I don't take anything. I took CBD oil. Whether it helped or not, I don't know. I mean, to some extent, the virus exits your system one way or another. But if you could get any sort of relief from that system, from that symptom of the inflammation, then that would be fantastic. So I think this is exciting news. I don't think it's surprising, being that the virus, one of its symptoms is it causes inflammation. And here we have a product that there's been extensive research that shows that it reduces inflammation, similar to things like Tylenol and Motrin. So I don't think it's any surprise that it may have some positive effect on the inflammation system. Now, whether it actually cures you of corona, I don't necessarily think that's what they're saying, but I do think they're trying to say that it could assist the symptoms. Be careful about smoking it too. I mean, this is a respiratory issue. So, I mean, if you wanted to, if you have COVID, I would not recommend, I'm not a doctor, but I don't think smoking is the best idea. But if you happen to have a CBD oil, you may want to try that and see how that happens. But I'm not making any health claims, and I am not a doctor.
And folks, that's how you save money on your legal bills. You just put another attorney on your show, and he covers all the disclaimers we need. Dustin, it's Friday afternoon. We're about to go into the weekend. I'm putting you on the spot here. Any words of wisdom you can leave us with before we go enjoy our weekend?
Just stay safe. I mean, here, we're all in South Florida right now. COVID numbers are rising. I don't know what the hell to believe, so I'm not making any sort of representations about, what you should or shouldn't do. But at the end of the day, it seems like these cases are rising. So just, don't stop living your life. Try to find happiness. Try to enjoy your weekend, but also just try to be as safe as possible.
Awesome. Well, this has been another edition of the Lab Report, brought to you by Mr. Cannabis Law. Folks, we will see you next week. Same channel, facebook.com/Cannabusiness Group. Have a good one.
Good one, guys.